Good afternoon, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar on using Web 2.0 applications in technical services. I'm Pamela Blue, Chair of the ALCTS Continuing Education Committee. Our presenter today is Julie Swierczek, Technical Services Specialist at the McKillop Library at Salve Regina University. Julie is responsible for all the cataloging at the library as well as for the management of the print serials collection. She holds a BA in History and Philosophy from Rosemont College and a Master's in Philosophy from Miami University in Ohio. After working in both large and small academic libraries, she is now enrolled in the Master's Degree Program in Library Science at the University of Illinois. Today's webinar is an outgrowth of an ALCTS e-forum held earlier this year that garnered a great deal of interest and attention on this topic. If you have questions, please submit them via the question box on your screen. Julie will answer as many questions as time permits at the end of her presentation. If there are questions that are unanswered, Julie will respond to those in writing, and all attendees will receive an email with the answers. Please note that today's presentation is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording shortly after the webinar has ended. Now I'm going to turn the presentation over to Julie. There may be a slight delay as we switch presenters.
Good afternoon. 2 points of business before I get started. First, I have a lot of material to cover, so I would like if we hold the questions until the end. And second, I have a cold. I have a mute button on my microphone, so if I suddenly stop speaking for a second, it might be because I've muted myself while coughing. So don't panic and think that your audio was dropped. I hope that won't happen, but I wanted to warn you anyway. This, of course, is the great benefit of a webinar. You don't have to worry about getting sick. So let's get started. First, to get this out of the way, I am very loosely using the term Web 2.0 to cover the social interactive Internet. Previously, the Internet was primarily filled with content that users could not change. In Web 2.0, we can comment, edit, and otherwise participate in the creation of online content. For the sake of this discussion, I am going to lump communications applications like instant messaging under the title of Web 2.0. Instant messaging isn't really about changing the content of the Internet, it's about having a conversation over the Internet. But for this presentation, we'll consider that type of application too. Some of the general types of tools I'll be talking about today include blogs, wikis, content management systems, instant messaging, scheduling applications, and online collaborative documents like Google Docs. I have two main goals for today. To introduce some applications that might be useful in your workflows, and to cover some of the promises and pitfalls in adopting new applications. It makes no sense to adopt new applications if no one will use it. And there are also concerns about securing information or preventing some information from being altered. Before I go any further, I want you to know that all the links for these applications and websites I discussed today are available on a website I created for this webinar. So you don't need to furiously write down web addresses as I go. Don't worry, I will remind you of this address again at the end. So the first question is, why? Why talk about using Web 2.0 applications in technical services? There's been a great deal of information about using Web 2.0 applications in libraries, but the focus is usually on interacting with the patrons and doing outreach. Many library blogs and publications talk about using Web 2.0 technologies for communicating with the public, but not as much has been said about using those same technologies behind the scenes. Well, it's our turn. After I outline some of these technologies, I'll talk a bit about adopting them and about the kinds of questions we should ask ourselves before adopting them. But first, we'll dive right into some technologies that might be useful for behind-the-scenes operations. To start with wikis. Probably the most well-known wiki is Wikipedia, where users collaborate to write an online encyclopedia. While the scale of Wikipedia is massive, much smaller wikis can be used for developing and sharing documentation. Imagine your current local cataloging documentation is in a binder or a file, or maybe it's online, but only one person gets to make changes, so when the webmaster is out of the office, you can't get changes incorporated into the documentation. With these styles of documentation, it is hardly worth the effort to create temporary documentation about a single project that might be over soon. But it's really helpful to have that documentation later on, as many of us have discovered the hard way, when we can't remember why we encoded certain data the way we did, or we realize that someone involved in the project didn't do it the same way as everyone else because that person had outdated documentation. You can put the documentation in a wiki and allow staff to make changes to it directly. Let me show you an example, and just hold on a second while I switch screens here. I am slowly moving my library's cataloging documentation into a wiki, so what I'll show you is hardly complete, but you'll be able to get the general idea. For example, when President Obama was elected, someone wrote a post on the AutoCAD listserv of useful call numbers related to Obama. I put that in my wiki. Our curriculum resources librarian likes her books processed in particular ways. I've added documentation about that. In most wikis, you can upload files. I have copies of documents that used to exist only on my hard drive, but now are available in the wiki. And sometimes you don't want documentation to be edited. That's okay too. There's access that you can make on the page to restrict authority on a page-by-page basis. This feature requires a small fee on this particular wiki platform. In other wikis, it may be free. The general idea of wikis, though, is that content can be edited by several users. But you might want pages of links to be edited by all users while you restrict other pages to administrators only. I am using PBWorks for this wiki. Currently, I have the entire wiki hidden so that only users of my choosing can access it. It's not available to the public. However, you might want to choose to make your wiki publicly available. Some wikis are free. PBWorks is free for educational and library purposes, although you won't have access to all of its features with the free version. Google Sites is free. Wikispaces is free. There are also proprietary software applications, that is, commercial software that must be purchased. There's a helpful article on Wikipedia called Comparison of Wiki Software that compares the features of many of the major wiki platforms available. Many of the proprietary software companies allow trials or at least demos of their products. Here are some suggested uses of wikis: project ideas and tracking, metadata application profiles, instructions on creating finding aids, tracking students or volunteers in their projects, in-house guides to local standards, file sharing for policies and procedures. One problem with wikis is that some users prefer to print documentation and then forget to check to see if the documentation is updated. With some wikis, users can subscribe to an email notification whenever the wiki is updated, or to a weekly digest of updates. Also, there is nothing stopping you from sending out an email to colleagues when major changes have been made. That's a good practice, especially when implementing a new application. Keep everyone updated on the new application via the standard channels of communication. Another helpful idea, although not related to Web 2.0 technologies, but worth a mention nonetheless, is using two computer monitors. While budgets are shrinking everywhere, it is sometimes possible to find a spare monitor to use. Most computers do not have a graphics card that can run two monitors, but inexpensive graphics cards under $40 are available. I won't dwell on this, but I think it's worth mentioning. I frequently open documentation in one window while cataloging in the other. It greatly increases productivity and saves paper and ink. If anyone has any questions about this idea, feel free to contact me afterwards. Today I am mostly focusing on the sorts of applications that are freely available and are pretty simple for anyone to use. But I do want to say a few things about content management systems. Anyone who deals with wikis and content management systems will know that I am oversimplifying both to a degree, but there are some links on the website for further research. A content management system, or CMS, is like a wiki, but it offers more centralized control. The main drawback to them is that they have to be deployed on your network by your IT people. You can't just download one or sign up on a website and start using it. These programs are complex, so they're usually not free, but they are powerful. The main idea of a CMS is to set up an environment where people can create and manage data for a website without having to know any web authoring skills. This website might be solely for internal use, or it might be published on the internet. So I showed you my PBWorks page, which really doesn't have much about my institution on it. With the CMS, administrators could set up site templates so that the page matches the visual branding for your institution. Often, the CMS is given your institutional web address, so users don't know that they're visiting a CMS when they access your content. One of the main purposes of using a CMS is that you can set parameters so all content is presented according to uniform guidelines. Users typically need little training to enter information into the CMS. Another perk of a CMS is that they frequently have built-in workflow management systems. So, for instance, say one person is in charge of entering data. Then a notice can be generated for a second person who will review the data and then publish it. This is a process that can be built into the system, so you don't have to email files back and forth and do these steps outside the CMS. It's also more common for a CMS to be created and managed by just a few people rather than having content generated by many people like on a wiki. Many institutional web pages you see use one form or another of CMS. I've included some links to a few content management systems information on the website. I don't use one here, so I can't demonstrate the back end for you. But in library literature, I think the ones we hear about most are DSpace and Drupal. Both of those are open source programs. Next, I will move on to Google Docs. Imagine this scenario. Your library wants to update its acquisitions policies. You break up into teams, with each team responsible for reviewing and editing one section of the policy. The normal way of doing this is for team members to edit versions and email them back and forth, which always leads to someone commenting on the not most recent version of the document, and someone else sending corrections to something that has already been corrected in the new version, and the wrong copy being shared with outsiders, with much red-faced shame and consternation all around. Enough of that. Put the current version of the policy in a Google Doc. You can control who has viewing and editing rights on Google Docs, so you can restrict editing access to team members, but let other people have viewing access. You can even set it up so that anyone with the link can edit the document without requiring them to sign in. What's really cool about Google Docs is that several users can edit the document at the same time. If someone else is typing at the same time, you can see that person's cursor move across the screen. Also, if someone makes an error, like accidentally deleting an entire section of the document, you can go back to a previous version of the document and find the text again. There are several types of Google Docs, but the two I find most useful at work are Document, which is a text editor, and Spreadsheet, which is a spreadsheet. Let me give you a few examples of uses for Spreadsheet. I keep my cataloging statistics in a Google Docs spreadsheet, which is viewable by a few colleagues. I used to keep my statistics in an Excel spreadsheet, which I emailed to my supervisor each month. What usually happened at the end of the year is that she needed a particular month's statistics, and the fastest way for her to access them was to have her ask me to email them again. Google Spreadsheet is great because she can view the statistics at any time, and there is a tab for each month, so she can go to whatever month she needs. I have another colleague who typically is responsible for filling out accreditation forms and surveys about the library's collections. He can access the statistics spreadsheet at any time to find data from any month or year. Here's another example. When our acquisition specialist orders a DVD, she creates a brief record in the catalog for the order. When I catalog the DVD, I need to find that order and attach it to the catalog record. She frequently creates the DVD title using information on a vendor website, and that is not always the same title that appears in the bibliographic record I create. In the past, we went through a lot of paper shuffling until we hit upon the idea of keeping track of these order records in a spreadsheet. At first, she kept an Excel spreadsheet, so whenever she added a new record to it, she would email me a copy. That wasn't ideal either, since I ended up with multiple copies of the spreadsheet. We finally put it in Google Docs, so now we can both access it at any time. Another helpful application in Google Docs is the form. I've seen this used frequently for generating surveys. When data is entered into this form, it goes into a spreadsheet which you can view in your Google Docs folder. Sometimes it is visually easier to fill in data this way instead of putting data directly into a spreadsheet. There are several options for question styles, including radio buttons, checkboxes, short text fields, long text fields, and others. A few caveats about Google Document and Spreadsheet. While they are easy to use, sometimes it helps to create the original document using your preferred Office program like Microsoft or OpenOffice, and then upload it into Google Docs, allowing Google Docs to convert the original into the Google Docs format so that you can edit it in Google Docs. I find creating documents from scratch in Google Docs to be a little time-consuming, probably because I am more familiar with the commands in my Office program than I am with Google Docs. But I find that once I have the basic documents started, Google Docs is easy to use. One major proprietary alternative to Google Docs is Microsoft Office Web Apps, which allows you to share and collaborate on Word, Excel, Publisher, and OneNote. There is a free version available for personal use via the Windows Live SkyDrive, but if you're using them at work, your organization will need to deploy Microsoft SharePoint 2010 on its network. You can use these Office applications offline, and they can automatically sync with the online versions when you connect to your network again. That means users can work on files when they are on the road or away from an internet connection, and then they can sync the files later. Google Docs currently does not have an option for offline use without downloading the file and then uploading it again later. There is no syncing feature. One of the benefits of the Microsoft products is that they are pretty much everywhere, and people know how to use them without wasting valuable time trying to figure out how. I think this is an important point to consider when adopting new technology, and I'll return to this theme again later. What other options do we have for sharing and co-creating content? Some librarians have reported success with setting up a course in their institution's course management software, such as Blackboard, Moodle, or Sakai. Some report that this is useful for committee work, since committee members can be invited to the course, and they are the only people who can view the course and its content. Most course management systems have built-in calendars, discussion boards, email lists, and other features that make group projects successful. However, course management systems are usually not free. Typically, an educational institution would have to set up the course for you, and some institutions may be reluctant to create courses for committee work. How about scheduling? There are a lot of scheduling tools available. Some people set up a group calendar in Google Calendar or another online application and let users fill in their availability. However, there are even easier ways of scheduling using free applications like Doodle and Jiffle. They synchronize with users' Outlook Calendar or Google Calendar, making scheduling a lot easier than bouncing emails back and forth to group members to find an agreeable time. Doodle is better for group meeting management and also allows polls to be sent to users, so you can ask some yes and no questions of users. Another application I was going to mention is Google Wave. This is an online collaboration platform from Google best suited for live group interaction like a very complex chat room. Since I started preparing this presentation, Google has announced that it will be discontinuing Wave because of lack of interest. I think this may have had to do with the program's complexity. But this brings up an important point. All of these applications are evolving and changing. Some of them are replaced by competitors' products. One of the lessons we should take away from this is that we should be careful not to put all of our eggs in one basket, so to speak. Don't become so wedded to a particular application such that you can't get your material out of there if you need to migrate it elsewhere. Also, pay attention to new applications that are launched that might even better suit your needs. Two blogs I like to follow for technology information are Lifehacker and ProfHacker. I'll warn you, however, that Lifehacker produces a high number of posts each day, so sometimes it's a bit much. But they regularly feature tips and tricks for increasing your productivity by better using the applications you have or by introducing you to new ones. Next, we'll go on to instant messaging, also known as IM. You can pick from any number of instant messaging platforms, and if it's not possible to get everyone to agree to a single platform, you can use Trillion or Meebo to connect to multiple messaging networks at once. But why would you use IM in the workplace anyway? Wouldn't this just lead to gossiping and wasting time? Sometimes email takes too long, and phone calls can't convey the right details. One of the great benefits of IM is that you can send links. A great piece of information to share when someone is reporting that a link is not working, such as a link to a database page. Knowing the exact URL quickly can save a lot of time. I also think IM has potential to be a great training tool. Instead of having a trainee get up from his or her desk and go find a trainer every time there is a question, the trainee can send a quick message like, "Where's the documentation on this process?" The trainer can send a link. IM is also handy if a bunch of people need to collaborate on something quickly. You can tell your team that today is an IM day and that they should know that something is happening that requires quick thinking and fast responses. You can then ask questions while everyone is sitting at their desks instead of calling everyone into a meeting and having people running back and forth to their computers. You can also set up most IM clients to save a chat transcript, so if a lot of data is shared quickly, you can refer back to it later while compiling a document. IM is also helpful if you work in a cubicle farm or shared office where everyone has to hear every word you say. You can have a silent conversation with a coworker without everyone else being interrupted. Of course, this has the potential for abuse, for sharing not so nice comments about coworkers, but I think that not all people will have a problem with this. You know your coworkers and your staff and can probably judge if this would be an issue. The one major drawback of IM is that it often does not work well if you are running macros on your computer. However, many IM clients have a web-based version which might be able to run without interrupting your macros. You'll have to test it to find out. Next up are blogs. Most technical services blogs are about technical services in general. On the website, I have links to some of them like Planet Cataloging, which itself gathers content from other blogs that are about cataloging. I think these blogs are outstanding, and they provide a great way to stay on top of changes in the field. However, my focus here is on applications that make our workflows more efficient. Sometimes these blogs have the opposite effect. They distract us from our work instead of helping it run more effectively. So I want to quickly run through two ideas: managing blog posts and using a blog to help in your workflow. I don't want to spend too much time on blog readers, but they are useful to understand. A blog reader is a tool where you can subscribe to multiple blogs and then be able to look at them all in one place. This is better than having to visit each blog individually and figure out where you left off reading the content. Just like an email inbox, a blog reader shows you how many posts are unread by marking them in bold. There are many freely available blog readers online. Some web browsers also have a tool for adding blog content. Many blogs allow you to subscribe to the content so that it will be delivered to your email, but I don't recommend this option. Otherwise, you will soon be drowning in blog posts. It's much better to keep your blog posts separate and visit the blog reader when it is convenient for you to skim them. Skimming is another useful tool. Many of us probably feel obligated to read every word of whatever document we open. It's a habit. When it comes to blog posts, however, give yourself permission to just read the headline or skim the first few sentences before you commit to reading the whole post. One of the great benefits of a blog reader is that you can search blog posts in a more useful way than just going to a search engine and searching everything. For instance, I keep all of my library-related blog posts in a folder called Library. So if I want to see what people have been writing about RDA lately, I can enter RDA in the search box and restrict the search box to my library folder. The results will be posts containing the keyword RDA, but only from the blogs I follow. Let's turn to creating blogs. There are many blogging platforms available for free. My library has a blog on WordPress and one on Blogger, just to name two platforms. Again, I have included links to this in the website that I'll give you at the end. Many of the blogs out there on technical services topics are meant to be read by a wide audience, such as catalogers in general. But how can we use blogs to do things better at our jobs? You could use a blog to disseminate information about temporary projects. Since blog posts are displayed with the newest post at the top, this would be a good way to highlight instructions for a project that you are working on right now. Most blogging software has many of the same capabilities as Wikis, so they are useful for sharing information. Users can search through older blog posts for instructions and download files that are posted in the blog. Additionally, you can add tags to multiple blog posts so that people could click on a tag and bring up all the posts with that particular tag. A blog can have one author, or you could grant permission for several people to create and edit blog posts. You can set up your blog so that it is viewable by the public, or only to people who have been granted access, which usually requires a login. One great feature of blogs is that users can comment on posts. This is really helpful because other readers can then see questions and the answers associated with a particular set of instructions. And then the author can go back and update the post if changes need to be incorporated. I want to show you a really interesting blog that's on a technical services topic, Shayrab Chen's blog on non-Roman cataloging at Ohio State University. And I'll switch over to that. You can see that this blog is used much in the same way as one would use a wiki. Each post covers a different piece of content. But the benefit of the blog is that the newest entries appear at the top, so the information that was most recently changed is right there in front of you. Chen wrote an article about using a blog in technical services, and I've included the citation on the website. Okay, time for a deep breath. So far, we have stampeded through Wikis, content management systems, Google Docs, course management software, scheduling applications, instant messaging, and blogs. I didn't even talk about Twitter and Facebook, but those are typically used for outreach purposes in libraries. So we're coming down the home stretch here, and now it's time to get to the good stuff. I want to switch gears now and start talking about some of the problems that we need to be aware of when we consider adopting Web 2.0 applications. Now, if you walk away from this webinar with only one message stuck in your brain, I want it to be the need to respect and protect patron privacy when using Web 2.0 applications. Let me give you an example. I'll pick on academic libraries since I work in one. Let's say you decide to use a blog to coordinate the workflow in technical services. Say you make the blog open to anyone to view because you've got a few faculty members that want to know what's going on. You put posts on it like, please give priority status to the new AV materials that arrived today. That's fine. But then someone in the department writes, when Professor Smith's copy of Training Your Pet Hamster arrives, please rush it for him. Whoa, we should not be making blog posts out of private patron information. Or say you're much more careful than that, and everyone in the department knows not to even hint about patron information on the blog. But then Professor Smith comes along and writes in the comments on a blog post, is my copy of Training Your Pet Hamster here yet? And he includes his name. You didn't mean for that to happen, but that person has just advertised private patron information to the world. I think we have to be very careful here. As we hear all the time, the distinction between what is private and what is public is being blurred online. But as a profession, we're still supposed to protect patron privacy. We should be careful about creating any online applications that might encourage users to share their private patron information. For that reason, I think that a lot of the applications I mentioned today are best used behind the scenes and not available to the general public. Or, in the case of blogs, you can set it up so that comments have to be approved by the blog manager before they show up to the public. That way you can restrict comments and not publish them if they really have private content. I mean, if you're a liaison and your faculty contact wants to use instant messaging to talk to you, that should be all right because no one else can see it. But be careful of creating open documents that the public might find and start posting their private information on. It's our job to be vigilant about protecting their privacy. They might neglect to protect their own privacy, so we shouldn't create opportunities for them to blast their private information to the world. When it comes to specific patron requests, stick with email or instant messenger or online forums where the content cannot be viewed by the public once the form is submitted. Now that we've taken care of the big concern, we can move on to a few other ones. In technology circles, they talk about the problem of just another inbox. When we have several communication applications at our disposal, we could spend hours every day just trying to gather the information we need to do a job. When you sit down to start a task, you should not have to check a blog, a wiki, a content management system, your email, your voicemail, an online shared document, instant messaging archives, and scheduling software to figure out what you need to do next. You need to streamline your applications. First, you should pick an official channel of communication. I suggest using email. As the saying goes, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. We're all pretty well acclimated to using email, so if you have online documentation of any kind, it is most helpful if notices about updates are sent to users' email addresses. When you are making the decision to adopt a new application, or even just to test one for a while, be sure to consider this problem. While I have been talking about adopting new applications, I just want to emphasize some of the benefits of email. There is a permanent copy of the message. In many email programs, you can prioritize, flag, and set action reminders on emails. Emails are mostly private, although it's possible, as you know, for them to be forwarded to the wrong person without your approval. Of course, the same could be said about conversations or snail mail, so this problem is not exactly new. Emails also serve as a useful work record, and they are usually searchable too. As a side tip, I like to save every email I get from someone thanking or praising me for my work in a thanks folder. When it's time for my annual review, I then have all of that lovely stuff at my disposal. Another problem you might have is figuring out just who is going to set up and manage these applications. For example, say you want to use a wiki, but you don't have the time to move your documentation into a wiki, or you just don't feel comfortable starting one yourself. If you have tech-savvy volunteers or student workers, perhaps you could use them to get the project started. As I mentioned earlier, I've been moving my cataloging documentation into a wiki. Every time I access a document in paper or on my hard drive, I review it and enter it into the wiki. This only takes a few minutes, which is easier than trying to do everything all at once. Of course, I'm the only cataloger here, so it's okay if I do it this way. If you work with a team, perhaps the better route would be to delegate specific content to each team member so that no one person has to do it all. This should enable you to get the documentation online quickly. Also, most wikis allow you to post files into the wiki, so you might just be able to upload batches of documents that you have stored electronically already. Then, whenever someone opens a document, you could spiff it up so that it looks a little nicer on a wiki page. Let's turn to the problem of Techno Lust. When it comes to new applications, we're like crows finding a new shiny object. We want it. I hope that some of you have been intrigued by some of the applications I'm discussing today, but we have to be careful. Just because some application is shiny and new doesn't mean it's right for us. I've heard too many stories of people trying to move processes online when the old paper and pencil method worked fine. Keep in mind that it is not a good idea to stress your staff and coworkers. Change is stressful, even if it's change for the better. If you are adopting several other new technologies this year, then this might not be the right time to add others to the mix. You'll have to judge your workplace climate to know whether there's too much change happening already. One option to consider is to invite staff to play with certain technologies. For example, if I were thinking of adopting instant messaging in the office, I might invite staff to set up accounts and give it a whirl without mandating its use. After a month or so, see if anyone has found any use for it, or if it's an annoyance, or worse yet, it interferes with someone's workflow. As I mentioned before, it can interfere with macros, and if the person you need to contact the most is a heavy macro user, then it might be best to just forget it for now. Related to the problem of Techno Lust is the interruption of work by too many distractions. I see instant messenger as being a big risk in this area. I already have notifications of new emails in my system tray and pop-up calendar reminders. Do I really need something else that is going to break my concentration? If you're doing the sort of work that requires uninterrupted concentration, then instant messaging might not be a good idea. Or you might establish set times when it can be used freely, like a particular time each day. Just because you crave the latest gizmo and you want to be cutting edge does not mean it is a good idea. A related point is about staff adoption of new technology. When I talk to people about using Web 2.0 technologies, they often tell me stories about people who won't use them. First, I want to say this clearly, this is not a matter of age difference. I tire of hearing about the digital native generation and the old Luddites. That division simply does not stand. There have been many studies showing that the digital natives are not as skilled with technology as we assume they are, and as for the old Luddites, who do you think is creating these applications? Sure, sometimes they are made by young people, but more often than not they are being developed by people who have not seen their 20s for a long time. Many of the bleeding-edge library technology experts are closer to retirement age than their teens. We need to avoid thinking that older people won't adopt new technologies. If they are reluctant to adopt them, there is usually a reason for that, a reason that has nothing to do with age. So how do we implement new technologies? First, and I think this is critical, we must come up with a reason for using a new technology. This might sound glaringly obvious, but it's important to articulate this reason. This will help people be more open to adopting it. If your reason is just that it sounds like a good idea, then that's not enough. You need to ask, is it going to save money, improve efficiency, make documentation easier to use and easier to update? Do you have people working outside the physical office space who need to be able to access this information? Are people traveling for work or telecommuting? Many of these issues provide good reasons for adopting new applications. But what if you make a good argument for it and people are still reluctant to adopt it? This is when it becomes a management issue. Depending on the nature of the application or process being adopted, it might be necessary to make it a goal for the employee to reach during a specified period. If given ample training and time to adjust, an employee who refuses to follow the new requirement is not someone who is just reluctant to adopt technology. This might be someone who has job performance issues. Let me give you an example. I've heard stories about departments that put their documentation online and then went through a lengthy training process to show employees how to access documents online. They were not even asking all the employees to edit the documents. They just wanted employees to be able to view them. And still they found some people refused to look at the documents online. Some people called their coworkers and asked them to view the documents and print them for them. When employees are that resistant to change, there's probably something else going on. For instance, it might be that the employee has difficulty reading text on a computer screen. Or perhaps the employee is just too stressed and overworked and feels that this is simply not the time to figure out how to navigate new documentation. In those cases, it's time to sit down with the employee and discuss these problems and find solutions. Sometimes, though, people just resist change, whether it's a good change or not, whether they're stressed or not, whether it works or not. To avoid problems along those lines, I think it's important to use a clear timeline. If you are adopting a content management system, for example, you might want to go through several phases. First, an introduction and training phase where everyone is given the basic tour of the technology. Second, a phase where people get to use the technology while still having access to the old version. And third, a final deadline where the old technology will no longer be available and the new technology must be used by everyone. If you spread out those three phases over, say, 6 months or even a year, employees should have ample time to adjust to the new system and also come to accept the fact that they will be responsible for accessing the content using the new method, so they might as well get used to it because the old method will go away at a definite date. Of course, not all technology adoption has to be this troublesome. Many of the 2.0 applications we've adopted in our institution have been adopted in a casual way. We recognize a shortcoming of a current method. Then we look for an application that would help us overcome that shortcoming. Then a few people test it out, and then we invite other people to try it too. In a larger institution, this might need to be delegated to specific employees. I work in a smaller institution, though, so we just try things out in a collaborative way. I also think there is something to be said for this sort of technology adoption being driven from the bottom up rather than the top down. When employees discover new ways of doing their work themselves, they will be invested in adopting the new method. This sometimes works better than having directives passed down from on high. On the other hand, some applications like content management systems will require top-down distribution, and for many others it might be necessary to have approval before implementing them, such as starting a blog that can be viewed by the public. One minor complaint that is common is that people don't want to sign up for an account on yet another internet service like Google, Yahoo, or Windows Live. One of the reasons I like using Google is that you can sign up for an account using your work email address as your username. This is particularly nice for people who use Google privately because they can have a separate work account. I think it is a good idea to keep work and personal accounts separate so you can maintain a healthy work-life balance. Again, if someone is reluctant to sign up for an account, this might require some management intervention. Hopefully, once people are aware of the reason for using new services and know the benefits, they will be less reluctant to sign on to a new account. As a side note, I know I am not the only person who has a bajillion logins to remember. I am sometimes reluctant to add new accounts because I already have so many. But that's where password management software really helps. I use LastPass, which is a small browser add-on. I use a really complex master password to log into LastPass, and then it remembers all my other passwords. Also, all my websites with logins are stored in bookmark folders in LastPass. When I use those bookmarks to go to work websites, LastPass automatically logs me into the site. I've included information about LastPass on the website too. Earlier, I emphasized our need to be vigilant about protecting patron privacy. Another thing we need to be careful of is security, which is largely about financial security. Don't store your account numbers or financial information in online sources unless you feel confident that the data is protected. As much as I like Google Docs, I wouldn't recommend storing credit card numbers in there. Maybe I'm slightly paranoid, but I sometimes wonder if Big Brother is watching. However, I think that sort of paranoia is healthy when it comes to working on the Internet. Be careful about what you send out into the ether. So, I have covered wikis, content management systems, Google Docs, course management software, scheduling applications, instant messaging, and blogs. And then I talked about privacy, the problem of just another inbox in Techno Lust, and the possible issues with getting staff to adapt new technology, emphasizing that this is often a management issue. Finally, I mentioned the problem of keeping financial data secure. Now that I've talked your ear off, I invite you to ask questions and share any comments you might have. And if I run out of time today to answer your questions, please feel free to contact me via email afterwards. I'd be happy to hear from you. And just to remind you, the presentation website, which is packed with URLs and other information, is available online at tiny.cc/technical services. So I'd like to hear your questions. Okay, someone's asking, what do you suggest if you don't have time to introduce new technology to staff over 6 months? That's a very good question. Yeah, 6 months is certainly, for something as complex as a content management system, a long-term implementation would be ideal, but sometimes it has to be quicker. It's just a matter of time management, really. I mean, if you have to adopt something rather fast, you're just going to have to find time for the employees to do that. I mean, if you need to do it in a month, that's okay. It's just that you have to realize that people need opportunity to practice with the service. And if you're telling them to do this in addition to an already full workday schedule, they're going to have a hard time fitting it in. If, on the other hand, you tell people we are going to be spending 30 minutes on this today and tomorrow and the day after that, and they know that that time is set aside and that it's understood that their other workload has to be shifted, then you can have more time to spend to get the application in place. What do I think of Google Groups for meetings? I haven't tried Google Groups for meetings in my workplace because I work in a smaller institution and we usually just hang out over the water cooler. But I have used it for a group that I'm involved with on campus that is interested in environmental concerns. It's a grassroots group, and we found it really useful. It has a listserv built into it, so you don't have to remember people's email addresses. You don't have to set up a contact list. It's all saved right there in Google Groups. But one of the things we like a lot about it is there are web pages internal to Google Groups. So if I have a new link about something, I can update, anybody who's in the group can update the web page. So I don't know if I would use it for live meetings, but it's a great way to continue conversations after meetings and in between meetings, back and forth, and sharing information. Have I used an institutional login for Google Docs and spreadsheets? No, I actually break my own rule about that, and I use my personal login to keep all of my Google stuff in the same location. But my coworker uses separate logins, and she thinks that that's fine. My email address, for example, is julieswierczek@salve.edu, and you can actually use that entire phrase as your login and just set up a new Google account that way. If I had to recommend one new technology to begin with, what would it be? I think Google Docs and just sharing documentation online in that way is really helpful. It's really nice when you're working on a draft document with somebody else to just know that there's one copy and one copy alone, and you don't have to worry about if this is the newest copy. And also, like I said, with the spreadsheet function, it's so nice to be able to have access to spreadsheets that you might not even realize that it would be useful for you to have access to certain documentation that other people have. For example, their spreadsheet information, and once you have it on the internet, though, you wonder how you live without it. Catherine's asking me if I have any comments on document management systems, that they use one for at her workplace. We don't use one here, and that's one of the reasons we kind of went to the web. I don't have experience with document management systems, but content management systems frequently have similar, similar aspects to them. It's basically the same idea as using a content management system or a wiki, in that you have a central location where you can share documents with each other. We have a shared hard drive in our workplace, but frankly it's so small and it's underutilized and it's kind of hard to get to. So those are things that get in the way of us using it, and so we found it's easier to use these other free online sources. I have a question about whether LastPass is open source. It is, and it's also very highly rated by some independent security sites. One of the great things you can do with LastPass is it can generate random passwords for you. So if you want to tighten your web security, for example, your personal financial information, you want to change your password on a regular basis, it can generate some pretty random, pretty uncrackable passwords for you to use, and all you have to remember is the master password that logs you into LastPass. I have a question about whether I worry about a lack of people-to-people content with the use of applications such as instant messaging, possibly resulting in less collegiality. That is a very good question, and I think that there has to be a healthy balance between the two. Even though I work in a small library, sometimes I feel like I only see people when we have our library council meeting once a month, or I run into people, you know, at the water cooler or something. But yet, there is something to be said for, you know, walking to somebody else's cubicle or walking to somebody else's office and saying hi in person or using a phone call. We should be careful about setting it up in a way that we are basically avoiding all human contact by using these methods. I think that that'll bite us later when we have to have, you know, if you're doing a presentation or meeting new people, your social skills will get rusty or something. So I think that there's something to be said for not abusing these technologies. On the other hand, a lot of what I'm talking about here, like sharing spreadsheets, really wouldn't be something that you would do in person anyway. So you're not taking over normal social functions by using this method. As for instant messaging, I don't think of it so much as replacing social interaction, but I think of it in the workplace as just sending really quick bits of information back and forth, faster than using email, or easier than using a phone call in the case of sending things like links. Google Docs sometimes can't convert complicated documents. This is true. It does have limitations. And I think that's supposed to be one of the benefits of using the Microsoft Web Apps version instead. If you use Web Apps through the online interface, it does not have all of the functionality of Microsoft Office. However, if you use a document that's in Web Apps through your Microsoft Office application that's on your desktop, you will have access to all of the functionality, and you will be able to save complicated documents through there. I have a question about tracking workflows within technical services between different working groups. That's a good question, and it's not one that I have a very good answer for. I think in a lot of places there would need to be some kind of centralized decision about how things are supposed to move between groups, and then possibly you could put up some kind of workflow chart in a wiki, and to me that sounds like an issue where, say, the acquisitions group has a new shipment of something that's supposed to be out on the shelves quickly. It might just be a question of the person who's in charge of the acquisitions group emailing the person who's in charge of the cataloging group and saying, we have a priority shipment, can we bring it over? I don't know so much that this is something that can be managed via some of the online channels I've discussed so far today. Well, it looks like that's all the questions for today, so I'm going to turn this back over to Pamela.
Useful, and thank you, Julie, for your very useful and engaging presentation. I suspect many of us, I'm certainly one of them, will feel more confident about using some of these applications now. And I have a number of really good ideas of what I'd like to do here. You will soon receive a short online evaluation form. Please take a few minutes to respond to the questions and return the form to us. The ALCTS Continuing Education Committee reviews all the comments and uses them when considering additional continuing education offerings. We have 2 practical webinars scheduled for October 6 and 27 on buying and selling library materials on the out-of-print market. Excuse me. Details and registration information about these 2 sessions, as well as all the ALCTS webinars, can be found on the ALCTS homepage. The ALCTS CE Committee is continually developing new webinars and welcomes suggestions. You may contact me at pbluh, that's pbluh, @umaryland.edu, or submit a proposal for a webinar using the form that you can find on the ALCTS webinar site. Before we sign off this afternoon, I would like to thank Geneva Chambly for providing technical support for today's webinar. She and her colleagues on the CE Committee's Technical Support Subcommittee help all of us to present these webinars. Thank you again for your participation today, and we look forward to welcoming you to a future webinar.